Hi. Hi, 8th grade. Hello, ladies. I'm here to talk to you about The Giver. I realize that it's been a really, really long time since I've done videos for you on this book, and I apologize. We should have been having a little bit of discussion before this and going over the study guide, so I actually have a lot to cover with you. So this might be kind of a long video. I apologize in advance. I'll try not to get too sidetracked. I kicked my kids out of the house, so they won't bother me. So hopefully we can get through this. But this is kind of a hard book. It's a fun read. But it's also hard. It's difficult. There's a lot of stuff that's really difficult to deal with. And I apologize for not doing a video on it sooner. I mean, since we first started reading. So we have a lot to talk about. One of the things I want to talk to you first off is that The Giver takes place in a dystopian society. Now, a dystopian society, by definition, is a society that is, of course, different from reality and appears to be perfect, but has some fatal flaws. So the citizens, a lot of them don't realize anything's wrong with the society, but in reality, us as the reader, there's like some glaring things where you're just like, no, this is not right. This is not okay. And the fact that if there are parts of this community, is what they call it, the community, that bother you, that is okay. In fact, that's good. Miss Louis Lowry put a lot of these things in here to make us question our own values and to help us with like just understanding some things in our own lives. But she was calling attention to some things, some issues that need to be dealt with in our own society. But it's part of a dystopian society. Other books, series that follow dystopian societies, one particular is Hunger Games. Hunger Games takes place in society, and most of the people think that it's perfect, that they've eliminated the problems in society, but goodness gracious, they have a tournament like every, I don't remember how many years, but where kids actually have to kill each other. And that's how they keep the peace, supposedly. So there's this glaring, this is not right, this is not okay, part of that society, and it eventually leads to, well, we all know Katniss rebels against the districts, and change happens. Okay, if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it is good. It's disturbing, but it's good. Okay, I like dystopian books. It's not everybody's thing. Some people have a hard time because it really is so real and yet so wrong at the same time. And this community is like that. Some of you ladies read the Ugly series. That's dystopian. Some of you have read the Divergent series. That's also dystopian. So this is dystopian, not to be confused with utopian. Utopian is when things really are perfect and wonderful. Heaven is going to be utopian. Dystopian is it has the illusion of being utopian, but it's really not. There are a lot of things about the community in The Giver that us as readers are like, wait, that's not right. But the citizens of the community just accept them because it's their way of life. And one of the things that is hard to understand, but it's important for us to understand, is that people are a product of their environment. And this is true in real life, not just in books. But even in real life, people who are raised being told that something is okay usually grow up thinking that something is okay. And it even is down to like little traditional things, but they feel like that is how it works. That is how you do it. And as you get older, you're going to realize that people who grew up differently from you accept different things as being okay or common or just part of life. When we study World War II, you're like, how could people, like kids are turning in their own parents? Well, that's because they were raised and they were put through classes and they were told that this is what you do. But it's just like simple things, like whether you take your shoes off on the porch or in the house or wear your shoes through the house. A lot of people think, oh, remove your shoes at the door, and nobody wears any shoes in the house ever. And then in other households, people will wear their shoes throughout the house and even put them up on the furniture. Some people, like in Hawaii or Japan, you take your shoes off even outside the house. You don't even bring them in the door. And those are just like little, that's a little thing, but that's a little example of what you grow up with and what you're used to, you think is normal. And then sometimes, like, so say you're a leave the shoes at the door person, and then you go over to somebody else's house where they're wearing their shoes and putting them up on the couch, you might be a little bit bothered by that. Or if you're a wear your shoes all the time person and you go visit someone and they say, hey, take your shoes off, you might be a little bothered by that, especially if you have a hole in your sock. So this is like a normal thing, and this is one of the things that I think Louis Lowry is pointing a finger at, that people tend to accept things that they grew up with that maybe aren't necessarily correct. You see this in people who grow up in abusive families. Some people actually, unfortunately, grow up their entire life thinking that it's okay for people to hit each other in the house, or that excessive drinking is normal. People who grow up in poverty, especially like in Africa or other countries where people are really impoverished, they grow up thinking that hunger is a normal everyday thing, that you just always experience hunger and that that's normal. And it's heartbreaking that people think that that is normal, but that's all they've ever known. So that's one of the things that sort of irk us about The Giver, because there are a lot of things about the community that are off and just not right and make us feel uncomfortable. And that's okay. But just keep in mind that this is not meant to be a reality. It's written, it is a dystopian society. It's not real. And Lois Lowry isn't even trying to make it real. She's perfectly aware of the fact that some of these things are ridiculous. And it's okay for you to think that some of these things are ridiculous. One of the things that is just super ridiculous to me that really bothers me, and it has to do with one of our big themes, is the fact that every aspect of their life is dictated to them. They don't have freedom of choice. I think it's Hannah who's looking at that theme. They are told what to do every little step of the way. We're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through the questions. Excuse me. And that's one of the things that is weird, and then as we get into it, you'll see more, but even like the concept of release is something that is sort of disturbing to us because it deals with death in a really absurd way. And it makes us uncomfortable, especially when they talk about the baby and that they might release the baby. Well, we understand that doesn't mean that they're setting the baby free somewhere. That means that the baby's not going to exist anymore. And it makes us feel uncomfortable, especially me as a pro-life person. And I believe in the sanctity of life and that everyone's life is precious and valued and important. And so when I read passages like this, I'm just like, oh, ouch, that's weird. So, and that's one of the things, the sanctity of life is a big theme throughout this also. And you're going to see as we continue to read that Jonas himself actually wrestles with this idea of release and the morality of it. So that's a big thing in this book. But if it makes you a little bit uncomfortable and for you to question and you're like, this is not right, that's good, because it's not. There are a lot of things in this book where you're like, ooh, man, they just accept that. They're just letting them do that. And it's because these people are conditioned to accept this as reality, but we as readers do not accept this as reality, and it just seems really absurd. And that's okay. That's one of the things that I kind of like about the book, because it lets you see things, and it really makes us think about, what do we believe? What do we accept? And where do we stand on these issues? So that was something I sort of wanted to go off on you. If you have questions, comments, I think I have the comments turned on now. So if you want to discuss or you have questions about some of these things that I bring up, you don't have to just accept what I say as gold. You're allowed to contribute your own ideas. In fact, I hope that you would give me a couple comments or so to let me know what you think. I love this book, not because of all the weird dystopian stuff, but I love the book because of the way that Lois Lowry describes the setting, and it makes it so real. I love the characters and the fact that you sort of get attached to them. Jonas is such a believable boy, and I love the way she writes it. And it's sort of like an escape into weirdo land, yes, but it is, you can kind of escape when you're reading it into this other world, because Lois Lowry is such a beautiful writer and she just writes so well. But the dystopian elements of it are things that some people really struggle with. And that's okay. You don't have to accept it as being all right. It's okay for you to think that some of these things are wrong, because they are. Anyways, so I want to go through your study guide with you and go over the questions and some of the worksheets that you've had to do. So get your study guide out. You can get your book handy if you want to, but I don't know if I'm really going to dig into it, because I think I remember most of what I want to say, and I'm not going to have to actually look anything up. But you should be following, first of all, you should be following along in your theme chart. You should have several entries by now. You have read all the way through chapter, 8, okay? And chapter 8 is a big one. You should have entries. You should, and if you don't, you might want to go back and actually glance over with your theme in mind. But you should have come across some places that triggered oh, this has to do with lies, or oh, this has to do with choice and freedom. I think those are the two themes that you girls have chosen. All right, so I want to go to, first of all, I don't know if you guys noticed this page here where it says a dictionary for the novel. When I gave you the worksheet of key terms, the Giver Key Terms worksheet, a lot of those were in the dictionary. So if you didn't remember what they were, I hope you looked them up in the dictionary. So we'll come back to that. But the first, I want to look at the community life schedule. Now, this entire schedule is somebody's, their life is dictated for them. So if you're tracing the freedom and burden of choice theme, all of the passages that talk about this life schedule fall into that theme. Okay, so first it starts with birth, and if you've left anything out, add it. If what you have written is not exactly word for word what I'm telling you, but it has the same idea, you're fine. Okay. So number 1 is at a year 1, the babies are named and assigned to a family. They aren't necessarily a year old. In fact, we talked about it later, how they're numbered by birth order. This could be a 3-month-old baby, or it could be a 1-year-old baby. It just depends upon where they were born at the year, but it always happens in December at the naming and release. And that's one of the things that's kind of weird, is that people don't celebrate birthdays, but they're all lumped into according to the year of their birth. So naming, the families don't pick the names, assigned to a family. This is a weird situation in the society too, where the mother and father don't actually have their own children. They have to actually apply for a child, and then the child is given to them. Okay. Number 2 has an asterisk because there isn't anything really significant there. 3 is when they start to be instructed in the precision of language, and they begin their dream telling. Number 4 is when the kids receive their jackets that are buttoned down the back, and this is to encourage cooperation, that they have to help each other get dressed. Then 5 and 6 doesn't seem to have anything really significant because they're already in school and everything. That's why there's an asterisk there. Number 7 is when they get their jackets that button in the front, and this is a symbol of their new independence and being able to rely on themselves more. Then at age 8, and this is where Lily is, the little Lily, Jonas's little sister, is about to turn 8. They get the jacket with the smaller buttons to indicate they are more dexterous, and they get pockets that they can be now in charge of some of their own possessions, and no more comfort object. Now, the comfort objects is a really weird situation because these are literally stuffed animals. I think we'll get back to that a little bit more, but they're taken away from them at age 8. At number 9, they receive their bicycle. And this is an interesting concept if you're doing the truth versus lies, the fact that everybody cheats with the bicycle riding, and most kids, when they get their bicycles, already know how to ride the bicycles, even though it's against the rules. But also at number 9 is when the girls lose their hair ribbons. So they don't have to worry about their hair ribbons anymore. 10 is when the boys get their hair cut. So it must be a symbol of age. They get their hair cut short. And the girls lose their braids. They don't have to wear their hair in braids anymore. At age 11, the boys get long pants. Girls get new undergarments, which because their bodies are changing. So without coming right out and saying it, this is when they're getting the more supportive feminine undergarments. They also get calculators, and they have to be finished with their volunteer hours. I left out at age 8 is when they start the volunteer hours. At age 11 is when they have to be finished with them, because at 12, that is when they receive their assignments. They begin adulthood. Their training begins. They continue schooling for a little while, but they also start their training now. And at that point, there's no more ceremonies. No more public ceremonies. No more public ceremonies, period. People stop counting how old they are, which is sort of bizarre. Then you reach full adulthood. And at a full adulthood, you can apply for a spouse, the matching of the spouse. And then once you've been matched and observed for 3 years, you can apply for a child, up to 2. You'll get 1 boy and 1 girl, or you could just have 1. But it seems to me like most of the societies in this case get 2. Then once your child are grown, you actually go to live with the childless adults. And at this point, they even separate from their spouse. Like, you're living on your own in the house of the childless adults. And then you go to live in the house of the old once you hit the old age. And then your life is done with the ceremony of release. But that's not a public ceremony. It just happens in the house of the old, which we find in one of the chapters. That is the first time that Jonas questions release, is when he is doing his volunteer hours, and they talk about the release of Roberto, and he's like, how come they don't let kids go to these ceremonies? And where do you really go when you're released? And nobody has any answers for him. And this is one of those things where you start to realize that Jonas is not like everybody else. And we find this out especially in chapter 8 when he gets selected to be the receiver. Because it further separates him from everyone else. So we'll get to that later. Now let's look at the key terms of the giver that I wanted you to note. Nurturer is a person who takes care of the babies. It's like the nurse in the nursery. Jonas's father is a nurturer. The nurturing center is where all the babies are taken care of, all together by the nurturers, not by their mom and dad, but by the nurturers until they are ready to be placed with a family. Naming and elders. I don't know why this is combined, but the naming is what happens when the elders, they give the person a name. And as you go through, you'll find that they sort of tend to kind of recycle names. But nobody in the community has the same name as anybody else. And an elder is a very important person who makes all the decisions. They're the ones that come up with the assignments. They're the ones that name people. They're the ones that match spouses. And the receiver is the most important of all of the elders. And they only go to him when they have a problem that they can't solve amongst themselves or that is really pressing. And nobody is really sure exactly what the receiver does. It's kind of like this mysterious thing, which makes it even harder for Jonas when he receives that selection. An assignment is your job. That's the job that they give you. You don't have a choice in the matter. You're going to do whatever it is that they tell you to do. But the committee takes into consideration what people like, and they look at where people spend their volunteer hours and what they're good at, and they try really hard to match people according to their talents and their personalities. The comfort object is a stuffed animal, and this is one of the parts where you're like, whoa, wait, because they don't know what animals are. There are no zoos. There are no pets. They don't have access to the wild. And so nobody's ever seen an animal in real life. And so these comfort objects are all they know really of animals. And at one point, Lily uses the term animal to refer to someone who isn't in control of themselves. And it just shows that she really has no idea what an animal really is. But the comfort objects are based on different animals. And it's a stuffed animal that you give as your reward, and then it gets taken away from you at age 8. A new child is just a baby from anywhere from birth to 1 year. The bike port is where you put your bicycles. It sort of seems to me like it's a garage sort of thing where they just put their bikes. Everybody has their assigned spot to keep their bicycles. The speaker is someone who constantly makes announcements within the community. And sometimes those announcements are like really just they're announcing things that are important that they need to report to a certain place, or it's a certain time for something. But sometimes they use them to reprimand people and call people out and tell them, hey, you're doing this wrong. But they never pinpoint anyone by name. It's always a general reminder of the rule. And if you broke that rule, you know that announcement was from you, was for you. And then they announce other things like something bad happened in the society, like the whole thing with the pilot. The rehabilitation center is where people go when they are injured to be healed. So it's basically a rehab center when we have rehab centers here. The House of the Old is like a retirement community. This is where the elderly people go. And actually, I feel like if anything in this society that is good, it's these houses of old, because these people are really well taken care of. Probably better than some of our old folks' homes here in the United States, where people aren't necessarily treated with care. So the House of the Old is where you go when you reach a certain age, when you're considered old. Volunteer hours is simply volunteering your time in some of these various jobs. The purpose of the volunteer hours is to figure out what your talents are, what you're good at, and what you like. And it also helps serve the community because the volunteers are able to do things that help that particular area. Like when they go to the House of the Old and they're giving the old people their baths, that is helpful. Birth mother are the mothers who give birth. They become pregnant, I'm imagining by some very scientific method of artificial insemination, and they are treated very well for a couple years until they have 3 kids. And then at that point, then they become laborers, which a laborer would just be a person who does general work. Celebration of release, where they talk about this with Roberto. It's at the end of his life. And there was a question on this, and it was sort of a trick question because they announce his life. He doesn't actually get to tell about his own life. They announce it, and then there's toast, and that's one of our questions, so we'll get back into that. But that is a ceremony, but it only happens in the House of the Old. The rest of the community doesn't see this, and they're not even aware that these things are happening. And that's one of the interesting things about sanctity of life and release. They try to keep the concept of release away from the other citizens as much as possible. Of course, when they said that the pilot was going to be released, that was announced, but because it was a punishment. But these natural releases, like of the old people, they happen without anybody really realizing it, except for the other old people. And I think the only reason why they know is because if they didn't, the older people would be like, hey, where'd Roberto go? And start questioning things. So they allow them to have that closure before Roberto is put to sleep, so to speak. And of course, that is when Jonas learns about that ceremony of release, is when he starts to really ask questions, some of the hard questions that are going to follow us through the rest of the novel. So now your Giver chapters 1, let's look at the questions. Chapter 1, the first question is to describe Jonas's community. You do that on your own. I already sort of talked a little bit about that. That's just sort of get your setting. It's a weird community, but it's also very peaceful. There are some good things about it. There's no crime, very little crime, I should say. People are well taken care of. Nobody's hungry. There's no poverty. So there are some good aspects to it too. I'm not saying it's all wrong, but definitely weird. Jonas's family. This is family unit of 4. This is as big as the family gets. You have mother, father, Jonas, and his little sister Lily. Jonas's father is a nurturer, and his mother works in the judicial system. And we sort of get the idea that she's a judge, even though they don't come right out and say that. Who is Asher? Asher is Jonas's best friend. He's also kind of a little bit of a firecracker, and he has a lot of energy, and he's a lot different than Jonas, but they're friends. Okay. Number 4, then, now I'm on the next page. What is the word that Jonas feels? It's apprehensive. And why is this? Because the ceremony of 12 is coming up and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And I can totally understand that because the rest of his whole life is about to be dictated by the committee. And he doesn't know what his assignment's going to be. And it's especially difficult for Jonas because he has not focused his volunteer hours. Like, he doesn't feel like he's found that place where he really feels like he belongs yet. And so he's really nervous and has no idea what they're going to choose. Whereas, like Fiona, for example, she's pretty sure that her assignment's going to be to work in the House of the Old because most of her volunteer hours have been there. And she really likes it and she's really good at it. Number 5, what is release? We don't know. Nobody really says, but I know that I'm thinking that you guys have been able to figure out by now that life ends at release. So we'll get into more detail about that, but it's basically the ending of someone's life, which I guess you could call it death if you want to be real specific about it. But the community doesn't really think of it that way. And I think that's probably why they use the term release, because it seems like it's more of a, I don't know. It's not as final, I suppose, as the word death is. What do they do? Let's see. What do they discuss in their ritual feelings and sharing? It's usually they're sharing things that bother them, and the parents, and they guide each other to kind of form closure. And they're just getting rid of any of this animosity or build up frustration or anything of that sort. And it's an attempt to keep things peaceful. You don't want people getting frustrated and angry. So these are the things that they talk about. And it's almost like therapy. It's like a group therapy session. So now what happens at the ceremony of 12? The assignments. People are given, this is what your job is going to be for the rest of your adult life until you go to the House of the Old. Chapter 2, what happens every December is the ceremony. All the ceremonies, 1 through 12. Number 2, what happens when their children become 1s and 9s? Well, I'm going to skip over that because we already did the life chart. Number 2, who is the receiver and how are rules changed? Well, the receiver is has the most authority. He's the most important guy in the committee. But rules generally are not changed. They're generally not changed. There's a lot of debate. The committee talks and talks and talks and talks and generally doesn't solve anything. That's what they said that's what it says, basically. But if they have any real emergencies or things that the society really needs help with, they go to the receiver. Who is Gabriel and why is Jonas's father worried about him? That's number 4. Gabriel was one of the babies in the nurture center. And his father's worried about him because he's just not doing well. He's not sleeping well. He's not gaining the weight that he should be gaining. And he just isn't really thriving like some of the other babies. The ceremony of 12 is important because you get your assignments at that point, and then you begin your adult life. Number 6, things that Jonas's parents share about their own memories of their assignments. They tell stories of how everybody got an assignment that was suited to them. And they talk about how the committee, that both of them were happy when they got their assignments. They felt like it was a good assignment. And so they're basically trying to reassure Jonas that the assignment the committee gives him is going to be something that he's going to want to do, that he's going to enjoy, and it's going to suit his personality. All right, so in chapter 3, what does Jonas notice about the apple? It changes. Now you'll find out later what really changes. He starts to see it differently. And how do the evenings end? It's the quiet, reflective time. That was number 2. Number 3, what else do you learn about the community from this chapter? One of the biggest things I learned from this chapter is that they are always watched. If the speaker can make an announcement about taking food just hours after Jonas took the apple, every movement is being watched. They are never alone. They are being watched all the time, which is sort of creepy. Okay, anyways. What do we learn about birth mothers? That is not a very well-respected job, that they get to have 3 births and then they become laborers. Now, when they're having the babies, they're spoiled and well taken care of. But after that, then they're pretty much like the lowest on the totem pole. So chapter 4, what happens at the 8s? We already talked about that. Number 2, where does Jonas spend his volunteer hours? Well, all over the place. But in this particular chapter, he goes to the house of the old, and it's kind of because he wants to spend time with Fiona, I think. And what they do is they help bathe the elderly. And they're just helping to keep them clean and help them with their hygiene. Number 3, what happens at release? So they talk about this. Roberto is released. It's a big celebration, but only in the house of old. There's the life telling, which is told by the speaker. There's a speaker that tells the house of the old. That was the tricky part about your quiz. Roberto doesn't get to tell about his life. Somebody else tells about his life. Then they have toasts, speeches, and he gives his final goodbye before entering the release room, where he peacefully passes. Of course, nobody knows exactly what happens in the release room. And that's where Jonas is asking some questions like, why can't kids do this? Why, anyways, I'm trying not to make this video too long, but it's already like half an hour. So I'm sorry, girls. If you need to pause this and like go to the bathroom, get a drink, come back, that's okay. I'm okay with it. You don't have to watch it all in one sitting. I'll do shorter ones from now on. I realize I should have gone over these first few chapters with you a lot sooner. So I really apologize for that. All right, so now we're in chapter 5. So what was Jonas's dream? Well, he dreamt of bathing. He wanted to bathe Fiona. And what are the stirrings? Well, the stirrings are basically this desire for someone of the opposite sex, this feeling of maybe lust, you could call it, sexual desire. What does Jonas have to do now? He has to take a pill. And the purpose of the pill is to suppress those feelings. And you'll notice that even like Jonas's parents aren't affectionate towards each other. It's simply a platonic relationship. It's not a romantic relationship really at all. It's more like a partnership. So then you have your Venn diagram where you're doing some differences and similarities between both communities. So you should have filled that out. There were a lot of differences, probably more differences than similarities, but there are some things that are similar. One thing would be like the structured schooling. Another would be the retirement communities, the existence of them. Of course, the house of the old is a lot different than nursing homes nowadays. The fact that people eat and drink and have to follow certain laws, we have in common. But there are a lot of differences as well, such as having your job chosen for you, which actually does happen in some countries, but not in the United States. And that you don't get to choose your own spouse, which again happens in some societies, but not in ours, not in the United States, but in other countries that still happens. So it doesn't happen in our community, and things such as that. So being able to wear whatever you want, those kind of things are differences. So chapter 6, I'm going to skip number 1, the sevens, because we already talked about that. Why, number 2, why, this should say why, not what. Why wasn't Gabriel at the naming? Well, because he was granted an extension, an extra year of nurturing, which is very rare. And I think Jonas even comments on how unusual that is. So what is the ceremony of loss? Now, the ceremony of loss has to do with an accidental death. Ceremony of release is on purpose. This is a planned death. A ceremony of loss is an accidental death. Loss is not the same as release. And the ceremony of loss, the community starts by chanting the person's name and then slowly quieter and quieter and quieter and quieter and quieter until it fades out. And the goal is for people to have closure and for that person's existence to just fade away. I think that they don't do that for ceremonies of release for the old because the old people have been living secluded in the house of the old for so long that most people aren't paying attention to them anyways. And that's one thing that you're going to start to notice too that's weird is the fact that like they don't know their grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. There is no like extended family. It's just that little family unit of up to 4 people. So number 5, 10s and 11s, we already covered the lifespan, so I'm not going to go over that. You should have the answers to that. Then number 6, how do people get spouses and children? They have to make an application to the committee, and then the committee decides who their spouse is and who their children are, and if and when they get them. So chapter 7, what is Jonas's number? He's a number 19. How do they get their numbers? It just depends on your birth order. The first kid born that year is number 1. The second one is number 2. and they have these numbers clear up until the naming. So if you're number 1, your name is 1 for your entire first year until you get to the naming. But if you were number, say, like 26 or something, or maybe 57, like one of the later ones, then you would get your name a lot sooner. But that's just how they do it. It's bizarre. But then they keep that number, and it's used like for assigned seating, and obviously, you know, it determines what order they're called up during the ceremony. Number 2, Asher's assignment is the director of recreation, which everybody agrees is a great assignment for him because he's very playful and full of energy. Number 3, when they say thank you for your childhood, this is one of the sort of weird things, because at this point they're ending their childhood. Their childhood is over now. You are no longer a child. So it's as if they're saying, we're taking your childhood away. Thank you for allowing us to do so. But also they're complimenting them because the society, the community enjoys these children and enjoys watching them grow up. And you can see this in how when they receive their assignment, they talk about their whole life and they say some embarrassing things that aren't so nice, but also some really good compliments. And they've known and watched these kids grow up and they have enjoyed it and appreciate it. Why do you think Jonas is skipped? So I don't know. If you read 7 and 8 together, then you might have skipped that altogether because you're like, well, I know why, because I read chapter 8. But you might speculate, perhaps he did something wrong, maybe he's going to get in trouble, or he has a special assignment, which is the truth. So number 1, what is the difference between assigned and selected? Being selected is special, and being singled out, he's like, it's like they're plucking him out of the society, being selected, as opposed to, and they saved it for last because it was just that special, and because it was going to blow everybody's minds, which it does. And that's why they had to save it for last, because if they had announced his selection in the middle, then the community just wouldn't have been able to focus for the rest of the assignments. And that's one of the things about this really fragile society, and how the director's like, oh, I've caused you anxiety by skipping Jonas, and we are so sorry for causing you any discomfort. And it's like, these people have like no feelings, and anytime they start to feel an extreme feeling, it's suppressed. So it's just one of those things that's bizarre about the society. So what is Jonas selected to do? To be the new receiver, which blows everybody's mind, and especially Jonas, because he doesn't even understand what receiver is, what it all entails. But as they start to explain the attributes he has, Jonas starts to realize, yeah, this probably is for me, because he knows he doesn't fit in anywhere else. And those attributes are intelligence, integrity, courage, wisdom, and the capacity to see beyond. And now, what's the capacity to see beyond? I wrote down to see the truth, but you're going to understand it more and more as we start now to read Jonas's journey to become the new receiver. But he's able to see things differently as how they really truly are. So he's going to start to recognize some of these problems in society and some of these weird things that we find appalling, and we're like the concept of release. He starts to really question it and the morality of it. And so that's one of the things that I really like about this book, because he kind of has like this awakening, and he starts asking a lot of questions, and it's just fascinating to see how he develops as, throughout being the receiver. So that's it. That's all you've read so far. You're going to read chapters 9. You're going to read some more tonight. And I know that it probably takes you a little bit of time to do these readings. And if we were in class, you'd have like an overnight or two to do them. So I understand if you're not turning in your study guides like the very same day that I assign them, because it takes some time to read. So you might turn in the study guide the next day or the day after, which is okay. And I'm going to do these videos where I go over the study guides and talk to you about the book more often. Okay. I know I should have done one before. I don't know why I didn't. It just sort of slipped my mind because I've been keeping up on my videos for the other classes. But for you girls, I just didn't. I'm not sure why. So anyways, here it is. This is your first giver video. They're not all going to be this long, I promise. I know you've been listening to me talk now for a really long time. Feel free to comment. Please give me a like. Let me know you're here. And I hope you're enjoying this book, even though it's a little bit weird. I really like it. I like it more after I've read the other two, which I do have in my classroom. So when we get back to class, if you're interested, you can read the other ones. So I guess that's it. Finally, I'm done. Have a wonderful day, ladies, and I'll hope to see you again soon. Bye.